From Stone Age tools littered across the ocean floor to a legendary city of myths uncovered after a storm, here are 10 of the most amazing archaeological discoveries found underwater. Stone tools on the seafloor. There is so much potential underwater for great archaeological discoveries from the North Pole to the South Pole. One of the coolest recent archaeological discoveries that took place underwater was when researchers discovered a collection of stone tools on the seafloor that date back 7,000 years. This happened along Australia's continental shelf, and it was the first discovery of its kind. According to Smithsonian Magazine, after the last ice age, the glaciers melted and seawater inundated a third of the habitable land in Australia. Much of this underwater land is hiding archaeological secrets. The research team found 269 stone artifacts under roughly 8 feet of water. These were discovered at the Cape Brugheris Channel, and it appears that the tools were used for simple activities like cutting, hammering, and scraping. Researchers even found a grindstone that was likely used for baking bread. The tools would have belonged to the indigenous people on the continent of Australia, and it's interesting to discover that these ancient peoples had lived in parts of the country now completely submerged underwater. According to a marine geoarchaeologist from the United Kingdom's National Oceanography Centre, scientists are very interested in studying along the northern coast of Australia because the evidence there could tell scientists about how people first crossed from Southeast Asia to Australia without using boats. There was definitely a sort of land crossing, and that much we already know. But physical evidence could detail much more about the lives of the ancient indigenous Australians. Submerged Neolithic settlement. A new submerged Neolithic settlement has been discovered in Israel, and it is truly fascinating. Among the ruins of this lost coastal settlement, researchers discovered houses, graves, skeletons, and even a well. The site is called Atlit Yam, and researchers believe it dates back from somewhere between 6900 and 6300 BC. It's also submerged beneath at least 30 feet of water. This is not a new discovery. The site was found originally in 1984 by a marine archaeologist, but because of a lack in technology, it's been difficult to study until just recently. The most recent underwater excavations have found all kinds of great things, including 7 megaliths at the center of the town arranged in a stone semicircle, kind of like Stonehenge but much smaller. These stones were arranged around a freshwater spring, which researchers say was probably the site of ancient water rituals. As for how the town got submerged in the first place, scientists say the village was abandoned abruptly when a tsunami hit the region, which was probably caused by some kind of volcanic eruption in the area of the Mediterranean. A particularly cool discovery at this site was a pair of skeletons. A woman and a child were both found, and after extensive testing, they were revealed to be the earliest known cases of tuberculosis in humans. What exactly this means for history is still a bit murky, but it's definitely one of the most fascinating underwater finds coming out of Israel. The Seven Pagodas of Mahabalipuram. Mahabalipuram is a UNESCO World Heritage Site off the coast of India. It's famous all over the world for its impressive cave temples, its ancient art, and fascinating architecture. Many of the structures here are from the 8th century AD, and the entire region is steeped in rich history. But one of the local legends says that thousands of years ago, this area contained much larger temple structures. Apparently, the largest of all the temples featured 7 massive pagodas, but all of them were lost many years ago. Even some of the earliest European visitors recorded that the locals claimed that in the recent past, the copper tops of the pagodas could still be seen shining out at sea. But until recently, the story of the 7 pagodas was nothing but a myth. In 2004, myth turned into reality. After a massive tsunami devastated much of the area and water was pulled out over 1,500 feet from the shore, locals reported seeing several rows of straight stones before the water rushed back inwards. But more than that, the tsunami broke apart the shoreline and uncovered a wealth of small statues and small temples that had been previously unseen. A new archaeological survey has been conducted by the Indian Navy to see if the site truly exists, and yes, it turns out the 7 pagodas are indeed real. The survey revealed a series of buildings, platforms, and walls that could be interpreted as a larger complex. Plus, based on the style of the carvings and some coins found underwater at the site, professional archaeologists now believe that the 7 pagodas did exist but have since been destroyed. Why? Probably because of another tsunami that attacked the region in the 13th century, wiping out much of the temple complex. Cleopatra's underwater palace. Speaking of temple complexes, nothing is quite as cool as Queen Cleopatra's palace being found off the coast of Alexandria in the north of Egypt. The city was originally founded way back in 332 BC by Alexander the Great during his conquest of Egypt. And since then, the city has had a pretty vibrant history. 300 years after Alexander's death, Queen Cleopatra took her place on the throne. She had a spectacular palace, at least so far as legend is concerned, but it magically disappeared. For the next few thousand years, nothing was known about Cleopatra's palace until the 1990s when a French archaeologist realized that it was hidden under the water in a bay near the shoreline of the city. We now know that Cleopatra's palace is real and just as amazing as history describes. Just off the coast of Alexandria, divers have found columns and pillars, ancient paintings, the foundation of Cleopatra's palace itself, and several statues that were likely part of Cleopatra's shrine and temple. There were even 2 perfectly preserved sphinxes found beneath the water. This site is not going to be restored to its former glory anytime soon, but it's still pretty cool to think there is even more to ancient Egypt hidden under the water where we can't readily see it. Another cool fact is that the team that found the foundation of Cleopatra's palace did carbon testing and found that it dated back to 200 years before her birth, meaning that she likely inherited the now sunken palace from somebody else. Vasa Shipwreck. The Vasa Shipwreck is one of the most phenomenal pieces of nautical heritage ever salvaged. It even has its own museum. It took about 6 years for the shipwreck to be found in the Baltic Sea, where she had been sleeping for 333 years. But by autumn of 1956, the shipwreck Vasa was discovered. Then, in 1961, a serious effort was undertaken to salvage the vessel from the bottom of the ocean. It was one of the first major shipwrecks to be completely retrieved from the bottom of the sea, and it was no easy feat. But what is the Vasa and why was it so important to be preserved? Well, the Vasa started her life as a wooden warship way back in 1628. She was built during the 30 Years' War to support King Gustav II Adolf's military campaign. The ship at the time was the largest ever in any Swedish fleet, and she was even equipped with an extra cannon deck. But the story of her sinking is pretty unfortunate. The ship departed, began to slowly sail for the open sea, got struck by a sudden wind, and sank before it even reached the ocean. Most of the crew and the passengers escaped, and this ship was very much forgotten by the end of the 18th century. Basically, the Vasa is Sweden's version of the Titanic, just a few hundred years earlier. Doggerland. Doggerland is a vast stretch of water between the eastern ocean of Britain and the mainland of Europe. Looking at it now, all you can see is water. You would never guess that 10,000 years ago it was home to a massive civilization of humans. But according to Live Science, there have been recent discoveries of a fossilized forest underneath Doggerland that researchers believe is physical proof that we are close to discovering the remains of a human settlement lost beneath the ocean for 10,000 years. In fact, a researcher from the Bradford University is absolutely sure that we're close to finding an ancient settlement. The most recent voyage taken to the North Sea lasted 11 days, and during that time, scientists took as many samples as they could from an area dubbed Brown Bank. Their hope is that by taking tons of DNA samples from everything they managed to dredge up during the expedition, they can get a realistic look at the types of plants and animals that would have been living there in the ancient past. This will give them a clue as to the precise location of the ancient human settlement. While no Stone Age relics have been found yet, scientists are extremely hopeful. Ancient Incan offerings. Archaeologists have made an outstanding discovery at Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. This lake, which shares a border with Bolivia and Peru, was a sacred site for the Inca civilization. It's believed that the Inca people practiced all kinds of different rituals at the lake, and just recently in 2020, archaeologists pulled a strange offering out of the water that had been down there for at least 500 years. Inside the offering, researchers found a small gold bracelet and an alpaca figurine carved out of a shell. Several different universities participated in the research at the lake, and they believe that based on the offering discovered, it had something to do with human sacrifice. What makes this so interesting is that the ancient Inca actually believed that their people originated from the lake. There was even a massive ritual complex constructed on an island inside the lake. Archaeologists believe that beneath the water is a hidden treasure hoard of artifacts. While this single offering is only a slight clue as to the specifics of the rituals performed hundreds of years ago, it is a very unique find, and with more research, it may explain why the Inca needed to throw offerings, which sometimes included their own friends and family, into the lake at all. Underwater treasure. Let's take a look at some sunken treasure. For centuries, people have suspected that the coastal waters of Albania, which have gone mostly unexplored in modern times, are a virgin hotspot for treasure and sunken ships. The coastline spans over 270 miles, touched by both the Adriatic Sea and the Ionian Sea. But because of the communist regime that ruled the Balkan state until 1990 was so brutal, anyone caught diving was to be shot on sight, no questions asked. It's no wonder that the plunder off the coast of Albania has remained untouched and unspoiled. That is, until recently. The waters are now open and looters are eager to steal all they can. Archaeologists are now in the area as well, trying to scoop up everything in sight before the looters get to it. But the issue here is that much of the wealth is only about 90 feet deep. This does not require any special equipment, and any hobo with a net can steal themselves some treasure. To give you an idea of the kind of underwater treasure we're talking about, expeditions starting in 2006 have found at least 40 shipwrecks along the coast, ranging from the 7th century BC to ships from both World War I and World War II. Many of these ships are from Roman times as well, and yes, there is definitely some treasure to be found. The biggest question is who will find it first, the treasure hunters or the archaeologists? Ancient Minoan Shipwreck. The Minoans were an ancient civilization that existed between 3650 and 1400 BC. They flourished on the Greek island of Crete during the Bronze Age and were some of the most prolific traders in the region, along with Greece herself and ancient Egypt. Now, a 4,000-year-old shipwreck has been discovered in the Mediterranean Sea near Turkey that belonged to the Minoans. According to the studies that have been going on since 2007 on this ancient shipwreck, it's the oldest ever to be found in Turkey, and that's saying something considering Turkey is one of the oldest inhabited regions on Earth. The shipwreck was likely used for trading, since the entire area of Mediterranean thousands of years ago was basically just ships going back and forth with trade and war. But the researchers didn't just find a boat, they also discovered a lot of other cool stuff underwater in the region. They found over 20 submerged harbors that had been lost throughout time, probably because of rising sea levels. They also found over 400 anchors littering the seafloor that date from between the Bronze Age and the time of the Ottoman Empire. This project was carried out by 15 researchers, and they were supported by the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey. The team included marine geophysicists, biologists, and underwater archaeologists, and even after several years of research, they have only scratched the surface of the amazing world living underwater at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. The Zakinthos Ruins. The Zakinthos Ruins are a bit of a disappointment. What researchers first believed was an underwater city lost to time near the Greek island of Zakinthos has turned out to be a geological phenomenon. According to the report from Live Science, underwater divers investigated the disc-shaped structures hoping to find clues of an ancient and previously unknown ruin. However, everyone was disappointed when it turned out that the geological formations are actually a natural phenomenon that occurred 5 million years ago. Archaeologists from a special department inside the Greek Ministry of Culture found absolutely zero evidence of an ancient civilization. They did this using special X-ray techniques and chemical analyses. The results showed that what everyone thought were ruins were really just fossilized remains of seeps on the seafloor that had once been kind of like exhaust pipes for the Earth, spitting out methane and hydrocarbons into the water. Because of the microbes in the sediment, which would have liked using the carbon and the methane as fuel over countless years, a kind of natural cement barrier was created around the structure. This type of formation is known as a concretion. To summarize, there was no lost city, it was basically just a concrete structure where farts came out of the earth. Which of these underwater discoveries is the most impressive? From the most terrifying vampire fish to a legendary river that can boil you alive, here are 10 of the scariest things found in the Amazon. Pyara vampire fish. The Pyara vampire fish is one of the most horrendous things ever found in the Amazon. This fish is absolutely terrifying. There are 2 species of Pyara, with the largest being the silver Pyara that weighs upwards of 35 pounds. While these fish aren't that large compared to a bull shark or something of that nature, they are that scary. They're called vampire fish for a reason. Just look at the massive fangs on them. They have a head about as big as a human's, and their teeth are long enough to do some deadly damage if you were ever silly enough to put your hand in the mouth of a Pyara. These huge fish can be found throughout the Amazon, but are mostly located in the Rio Orinoco in Colombia. This is also the river that is home to the notorious pink dolphins. The trademark teeth of these vicious fish are used to impale their prey, which typically consists of smaller fish. You might also hear the Pyara being called the saber-toothed barracuda, the vampire tetra, or the saber-tusked barracuda. Smaller Pyara are super common in large aquariums and are known to be ridiculously aggressive. The boiling river. Deep in the Peruvian part of the Amazon jungle is a mysterious boiling river that kills everything that enters it. At least that's what the legends say. This place has been talked about in Peruvian folklore for centuries. There were even reports of Spanish conquistadors who ventured into the forest looking for gold, only to return with stories of poisonous water, man-eating snakes, and a river so hot that it could boil men alive. And yes, this place is real. A Peruvian geoscientist went searching for it in 2011, hiking deep into the Amazon rainforest. Much to his surprise, he found a boiling river. The average temperature reached a scorching 186 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not quite hot enough to boil a man alive, but it's definitely a great template for a scary legend. While geothermal hot springs are super common all over the world, with most of them reaching similar temperatures, this is the only place on Earth with an entire river burning hot. It's apparently 82 feet in length and roughly 4 miles long. It's also 434 miles from the closest volcanic system. Suffice to say, this Amazonian legend doesn't make any sense, but after 5 years of painstaking research, it turns out that the river is heated by underground geothermal manifestations. Basically, heat is brought to the river through fault lines and cracks, with the source of the heat a significant distance away. From much deeper in the earth is a great source of geothermal energy, and that energy seeps up through the ground until it reaches the river, where it then makes the water ridiculously hot. Tyrant King Leeches. The Tyrant King Leech is arguably one of the most disgusting and horrifying things found in the Amazon jungle. It's a leech with teeth that is often found inside the noses of people after they go swimming in the waters of the Peruvian Amazon. The leech is about the size of your pinky finger, and it's a serious bloodsucker. It has just one jaw, 5 teeth, and it's meaner than any other leech known to man. In fact, Wired claims that its 5 teeth are longer than the teeth on any other leech. It's known scientifically as Tyrannobedella rex, and it's not something you want to take with you after a short swim. The first specimen of the Tyrant King leech was found by a doctor in 1997 in Peru after a young boy who had been swimming complained about having a headache. Later, another specimen was taken out of a young boy in a different area of Peru, and a third from a 9-year-old girl. The thing they all had in common was that they had been bathing inside of streams in the Amazon. We now know that the Tyrant King leech hangs out in the water waiting to go up people's noses. It invades the orifice of your nose and then feeds on your mucous membranes. Some different kinds of leeches that do this live in the Middle East, in Africa, and in Asia, and we hate all of them. This is just another terrifying reason not to go wandering in the Amazon. The walking palm tree. Most of us know by now that plants are far more complicated than they appear. If you've ever taken a look at the Venus flytrap, which has the uncanny ability to eat live insects, you know that plants can evolve to be spectacular. And this brings me to my point. One of the scariest things in the Amazon is the walking palm tree. The story of this tree has been told for ages, with many people claiming the walking palm tree can literally move its unusual roots to walk. Of course, nobody is claiming it can stroll to the store and back, but they do say that it can move a little way when it needs to. The difference between the walking palm tree and other similar plants is that the tree has a lot of small roots that make it look like it has a bunch of little legs. However, these trees are not like the mighty Ents from the Lord of the Rings. They won't be smashing any castles, at least not for another few million years of evolution. While many people anecdotally say that the tree can walk slowly from shade to sunlight, it's actually not true. According to Live Science, these trees are greatly dramatized. The walking palm can't actually walk, its roots don't move in search of sunlight, and unless you're beating on it with an axe or blowing at it with wind, it's not going to move anywhere. It certainly can't pick its roots up and go for a wander. The reason so many people who operate in the jungle believe this tree walking myth is because sometimes the roots of the walking palm really do look like they're moving. Sometimes the roots on one side of the tree will die, giving it the appearance that it's moved in one direction or another. Poison dart frogs. One of the scariest and most dangerous creatures in the Amazon is something that looks entirely innocent. I'm talking about the deadly poison dart frog. Some people consider these to be the most poisonous animal in the world. Specifically, the golden poison frog, which is native to the country of Colombia, is one of the most frightening things on Earth. Just imagine a tiny frog that can easily fit on your finger and has enough poison in its skin glands to kill 10 human beings. And that's if the poison enters your bloodstream. It doesn't even need to bite you. You touch the skin, the poison ends up in your mouth or in a wound, and you're dead in 10 minutes. It's far more frightening than any snake simply because it's pretty much a promised death. There is also no known antidote. But here's where things with the poison dart frogs get weird. They don't create the toxin themselves. When taken out of their natural habitat and bred in captivity, they are not poisonous at all. In fact, they are just like normal frogs and completely safe to handle. This has led researchers to believe that the poison dart frog synthesizes toxins through what they eat in the wild. They basically steal their toxicity from eating certain insects. To understand why the frogs don't die from the toxins themselves, researchers from the State University of New York did a little bit of investigating, and as it turns out, it's all about an amino acid mutation. Basically, the frogs have full immunity to one of the deadliest poisons ever because of a special amino acid in their bodies. It is truly fascinating. The poison builds up inside of them and is discharged through their skin glands rather than them being poisoned. Mosquitoes. Perhaps the scariest thing in all of the Amazon jungle is the mosquito. Mosquitoes kill indiscriminately. They are literally everywhere in the jungle, and you can almost never stop yourself from being bit at least a little bit. In the Amazon rainforest, the major mosquito species carry all kinds of seriously nasty diseases. I'm talking about malaria, yellow fever, you name it. If you catch malaria in the rainforest because of a mosquito, you are going to need preventative medicine immediately. If you catch the dengue fever from a mosquito, there is no preventative medicine and you're in big trouble. Most people who have visited the Amazon would agree that there is nothing scarier than the mosquito. Snakes are definitely a danger, giant fish can freak you out, but mosquitoes kill for fun. Mosquitoes actually come with a super long mouthpart that creates what is known as the blood-sucking proboscis. Adult mosquitoes usually rest in the daytime, so the best time to be out and about is during daylight hours. But once the sun goes down, they explode out of their hiding place and search for food. And guess what? If you're in the Amazon, you are the food. What a lot of people don't know is that tropical mosquitoes are actually in the same scientific order as the ordinary housefly. However, they are far more dangerous. It's believed that there are over 3,000 different species of mosquitoes, and they all live near water in the warmer regions of the world. And in case you did not know already, malaria is in fact the deadliest disease in all of human history. Bullet ants. Unlike mosquitoes, bullet ants won't kill you, but you will definitely wish you were dead when the searing pain from the bullet ant begins to take hold. The bullet ant has often been declared the most painful insect in the world. Out of every tiny creature that creeps or crawls, the bullet ant delivers the most painful sting. When one of them bites you, it's an experience that you will never forget for the rest of your life, and unlike some insect stings that hurt for a bit and then go away, when you're stricken by a bullet ant, the pain stays with you for between 12 and 24 hours. It's one of the longest miseries you will ever have to endure. The pain is so excruciating that some people have compared it to being shot with a very real bullet. According to a man that has been bitten by one of these horrifying creatures, the pain comes in giant waves and crescendos. It's like a tsunami of pain that crashes against you, recedes a tiny bit, then crashes against you again. And it goes on and on for what feels like an eternity. Some indigenous tribes in the Amazon actually use bullet ants in ceremonies where young boys become men. During the puberty rites, the boys will wear makeshift gloves filled with bullet ants, receiving multiple bites for a few minutes, and then they have to stand and endure the pain for the full 12 hours. In some societies, this is the only way to be accepted as a man. The only good news is that the pain does eventually fade and there are no long-term effects. Corpse flower. I can't think of a scarier name for a plant than the corpse flower. It's one of the largest flowers in the world, as well as one of the rarest. It also exudes an extremely terrible odor. If you came across one of these things in the jungle, I guarantee you would be awestruck and at least a little worried. The reason it's called the corpse flower is because the odor it emits is similar to what you might smell from a decaying corpse. According to an outdoor floriculturist from the Chicago Botanical Garden, the smell of the corpse flower is used to attract pollinators. The corpse flower attracts carnivorous insects that usually feed on dead flesh, such as dung beetles and flesh flies. The smell of the flower and its dark color are meant to imitate a dead animal. Then, when the fooled insects fly inside of the plant, they realize there is no food and they fly away. But they fly away with pollen on their legs, and the pollen eventually spreads across the forest floor so that more of these flowers can grow. After a single corpse flower has bloomed and fully pollinated, it collapses and dies. It's one of those plants that lives to multiply and then dies without doing much else. Brazilian wandering spider. Everyone is scared of spiders. You probably don't know a whole lot of people who would willingly hang out with a giant spider, or even a small one for that matter. And so it's only natural that one of the scariest things found in the Amazon happens to be the most poisonous spider in the world. This is the Brazilian wandering spider, also known as the banana spider. The Guinness Book of World Records has named it the most venomous spider in the world through multiple years. Not only does this thing look awful with its long legs and beady eyes, but it is extremely deadly. It usually only bites if it feels provoked, but that does not make anyone feel any safer. After a person is bitten by one of these horrifying spiders, the first symptoms are going to be be extreme pain at the site of the wound, sudden sweating, and uncontrollable goosebumps. After 30 minutes, your blood pressure goes crazy, your heartbeat goes nuts, and your lunch goes out of your mouth. You can get hypothermia and vertigo at the same time, then begin to convulse. It's an absolutely horrendous experience that most people don't recover from. But perhaps one of the most bizarre things about being bitten by the Brazilian wandering spider is that, according to live science, the venom boosts a certain chemical inside the body that increases blood flow, and in human males it can cause a very long and very painful erection. That's probably the last thing you want while rolling around on the forest floor suffering because of a spider bite. The forest floor. Psychologically speaking, the scariest part of the Amazon jungle is the Amazon jungle itself. It's just like the old saying, there is nothing to fear but fear itself. And when you're deep in the rainforest, there is nothing to fear except the actual rainforest. In this case, I'm talking about the darkness of the forest floor. It has been estimated that only 1% of the sunlight actually reaches the floor of the forest because of how thick the upper canopy is. That creates a pretty horrifying environment no matter what time of day it is. If you're under the canopy, there's a pretty high chance that you're in total darkness. And guess what? That can cause even the bravest person to lose their mind, become paranoid, and have a mental breakdown. From a secret dungeon hidden beneath an abandoned barn to evidence of a horrifying demonic ritual at an abandoned government facility, here are 10 of the creepiest discoveries in abandoned places. Dungeon of Horrors. Back in 2012, police found one of the most horrifying things ever in an abandoned farmhouse in the town of Pickering. This happened in Canada, and the thing the police found was a confinement room located beneath the floor of the farmhouse. It was basically a dungeon of horrors. What makes it even more terrifying is that police refused to discuss what types of crimes were committed inside the dungeon. According to a report from CTV News, the police claim that they discovered what the room was intended for, but because of the potential effect on the victim or victims involved, they could not discuss it. One thing is for certain, the dungeon was designed to hold someone captive. The farmhouse was located on a small property near the local airport, and it had been marked for demolition when contractors discovered the secret dungeon. Since then, a 44-year-old man was charged with crimes involving the farmhouse and its dungeon, though we still don't know exactly what happened since the cops are being so quiet about it. One thing is for sure, nobody builds a secret dungeon with the intention of giving out free candy. The Exton Witch House. In Exton, Pennsylvania, a house was built in the 1800s, but this is no ordinary house. It's known locally as the Exton Witch House, and it's been said that the family who once occupied it practiced witchcraft. It has been abandoned for quite some time, but it's still a seriously creepy location. There were once graves next to the house that contained the bodies of the family who had lived there, including the mother, father, and their 2 children, all of which allegedly died under suspicious circumstances in the late 1800s. But apparently the graves have since been lost without a trace. It was not until a YouTuber visited the Exton Witch House and filmed his exploration of it that we discovered the horrifying truth inside. According to the YouTuber himself, he discovered a small hut that had been previously a well, and through this well was an underground tunnel that led to a secret basement inside the house. Apparently, while the YouTuber was exploring in the middle of the night, his camera continued to detect faces and refocus on its own, as if there were aberrations in there with him. To date, the house has been vandalized repeatedly and nobody has occupied it. Another creepy thing he found inside was a cluster of chairs pushed together and facing the wall. It's unknown if the house has been used for anything unsavory since it was abandoned, but it's safe to say that the supposed witches who lived there in the 1800s were doing some pretty disturbing things, and who knows, maybe their ghosts still haunt the place even today. Have you ever visited a haunted house? Did you encounter strange apparitions or other ghostly entities? Let me know what your experience was like. Post a comment below with your story and then be sure to subscribe. There are loads more amazing videos coming out very soon and you will not want to miss even one. Human leg. In 2018, a police investigation was launched after a human leg was found in an abandoned building in Harlem. According to a news report from NBC, the New York Police Department said that a leg bone and femur were found on the 4th floor of an abandoned building while the workers were there to remove asbestos. A medical examiner was quickly called to the scene and the investigation was launched. The police are saying that the building sat abandoned since sometime in 1980, and an eyewitness who worked in the area said that other than a small general store on the ground floor of the building somewhere around 7 years ago, nobody has occupied any of its rooms. Of course, the questions surrounding the human leg are numerous. Whose leg is it? Why was there only a leg and no other body parts? And of course, what exactly was going on in the apartment that could have caused a person to leave without one of their legs? It's a true puzzle, and it's one of those weird mysteries that may never be solved. Mysterious ghost shark. Picture this, you're inside an abandoned wildlife park located near Melbourne, Australia. You're rummaging through the remains of exhibits and broken equipment, and suddenly you come upon the silhouette of an enormous shark floating through a tank of murky green liquid. That's exactly what happened when a trespassing filmmaker went to explore the abandoned park that had shut down earlier in 2012. It looks like they shut down pretty abruptly, especially considering that they left this horrifying shark floating in a green-tinted tank near heaps of litter and decaying arcade machines. The great white shark inside the tank was roughly 12 feet long when the filmmaker found it, and the reason the water in its tank was green is because it was actually formaldehyde, a chemical that has great preservative properties. Formaldehyde is also super dangerous, and exposure to it can be harmful. Apparently, the abandoned park has been a popular hangout zone for years. The entire building allegedly stinks like possum feces. There is still milk in one of the refrigerators that has been expired for quite some time, and some of the rooms even appear to have been squatted in, perhaps by homeless people. But definitely the creepiest part of the entire place is the floating ghost shark. It is super unnerving and definitely not the kind of thing you want to find while urban exploring. But oh well, at least the shark can't bite anybody. Scop. Scop is the famous ghost town in Namibia. You've probably even heard of the location before. It was a thriving mining settlement in the early 1900s, but was hurriedly abandoned in 1954. For the past 70 years, the homes of this once prosperous settlement have been reclaimed by the desert sands. It's a pretty mesmerizing place to go in the daytime, just begging to be explored and photographed. But the real creepiness comes at night when the desert darkens and gets quiet. That's really when the ghosts come out. Although the ghost town has been scoured by countless travelers over the years, there is still a lot of stuff left to find. The houses may be mostly filled with sand, but sometimes travelers find remnants of the people who lived there buried like hidden treasures. Some of the rooms are even relatively clean, and you can see the old tools of the trade sitting on benches never to be used again. Some more disturbing things to find are rusted bedposts, old bathtubs, and even a rusty kettle buried in the sand that may have served an old gold miner his last sip of tea. This is not a new creepy place, but it's definitely somewhere to go if you want to freak yourself out and find some old and weird artifacts. Satanic rituals. This next story is reminiscent of the terrifying Blair Witch Project movie. A man named Mike Kimmel, who spends most of his time searching for the invasive Burmese pythons in the Florida Everglades, stumbled upon something out of a nightmare. It was late in the evening and he was looking to wrangle some snakes near the abandoned Aerojet Dade rocket facility near the Everglades National Park when he found a large pile of rocks stacked up by human hands with red inverted crosses painted on them. His immediate reaction was that he had found the remains of some weird satanic ritual. Along with the upside down crosses painted on the rocks, Mike found baby dolls with crosses drawn on their foreheads with ash, something he thought was a bloody gown, and some pretty disturbing words that I cannot repeat here spray painted on the wall. According to Mike the snake wrangler, he was in the exact same location a few weeks earlier, and none of the weird ritualistic stuff was there. And even though Mike is used to finding lots of strange and creepy things in the forest, he felt that what he found on this occasion was eerily authentic. He didn't think it was kids trying to scare people, but perhaps something more real and infinitely more dangerous. Unbelievable creatures. In London back in the 1960s, a construction crew was working to clear the way for a new residential neighborhood. To do this, they had to take down an old abandoned mansion that had belonged to a man named Thomas Theodore Marilyn. In the basement of his abandoned home, builders discovered thousands of small wooden boxes that contained all the horrors of the world. So far as the story goes, Thomas Marilyn was some kind of fringe zoologist. Throughout his life, he had collected creatures and artifacts that most people think are only a myth. Among the souvenirs were preserved fairy skeletons, what might have been demon skulls, and all kinds of other strange creature artifacts. Of course, all of this stuff is complete nonsense. Even though it does look extremely convincing, a reclusive rich guy in a mansion did not have werewolf remains in a jar in his basement. The truth is that this collection of oddities was developed by an artist, and all the reports of it being found by construction workers were just part of a big publicity stunt. It would definitely be cool to think that some real-life Van Helsing was out there hunting vampires and ghouls, but unfortunately, it's just not true. Human remains. The last story was all hype, and this next story is all horror. After a house in Danville set fire, nobody thought too much of it. The house was abandoned and nobody really cared. But then, 11 months later, after the house caught on fire, somebody found something absolutely mortifying inside. Because the home was basically a burnt-out shell, it was extremely accessible from the front windows or the front door, meaning just about anybody could go inside and do whatever they wanted. And so it was that police were called to investigate the discovery of human remains. The police would not come forward to say who discovered the remains, but it was probably somebody who crept in thinking they were going to have a little bit of fun, only to stumble upon a human corpse. Unfortunately, this story crashed and burned pretty quickly back in 2019, and the members of the public don't have any additional facts. Whether the dead person was part of the fire that burned the place down, or if they perished within the abandoned structure later, it is really anyone's guess. Brain in a jar. Let's keep it rolling with the horror. Inside of an abandoned hospital in Glasgow, Scotland, teenagers found a brain in a jar. A video emerged back in 2016 of a group of teenagers who discovered a brain floating in a vat of liquid while they were scoping out a creepy abandoned hospital building. The brain with a jar in it was labeled and dated from the 1970s. That means it had been sitting in that building for around 40 years. Of course, these 6 teens were arrested by police after the video surfaced online, and a criminal investigation has been launched, but it's seriously doubtful that it was the teenagers who put the brain in the jar. What makes this story even creepier is that according to local news sources, the discovery of the brain happened just days after a different group of children discovered a fetus inside of a bag in the same hospital building. After hearing both these stories, I seriously hope nobody goes inside that hospital looking for something disgusting. They'll probably find it. Animal bones on strings. An urban explorer searching through an abandoned building on the farmland that used to belong to a man named Tony Martin, who became very famous in 1999 after shooting and killing a burglar, has found some pretty weird stuff. The owner of the farm was jailed over 2 decades ago after shooting the home invader, and since then his farmhouse in Norfolk, England, has been mostly abandoned. The guy was sentenced to life, but then had his sentence reduced to manslaughter because the public rallied behind him, saying that he was only defending his home. Whatever your views on deadly force against home intruders are, the truth about this man and his house adds new layers of complexity on top of the story. Of course, in any case, this urban explorer searching the abandoned buildings on the guy's property found a pretty disturbing sight. He claims that he found a room filled with bones of animals. And not only that, but many of the animal bones were strung together in weird and very creepy ways, then hung from the ceiling with rope. The explorer got all of this on video and posted it online, and you can see for yourself just how disturbing the scene is. Witchcraft, Satanism, or just some lunatic squatting on the property and playing with animal bones. Nobody knows who did it. Which of these discoveries is the creepiest? Let me know how you feel in the comments section. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. Thanks as always for watching, and see you again soon for another great video.